some cartoons and vodka and do them all night long. Are you ready for some fun? Drink 'em down, drink 'em down, drink 'em down. Drink 'em down, drink 'em down, drink 'em down. Oh.
Game of Thrones just ended its 8-season run as the ubiquitous show of discussion in America, and I managed to go the entire time without seeing any more of it than a Pornhub tit compilation. Not that it was hard, I just didn't buy HBO. And I'm not bragging, it's not like I was too good for the show. The reason I never really made much effort to see it is much more personal. I just don't really like medieval-type fantasy. Grand, pitched battles on horseback, the slaying of dragons, courtroom politics over who will wear the crown. These things more than often draw a yawn for me. I like Mass Effect, but each Dragon Age game has left me cold. Even the grand towering works of Tolkien that cast long shadows over the entire genre. I thought the movies were good, I read The Hobbit, it's fine. It's not always a deal breaker. I love the Lovecraftian-tinged Eastern spin on the genre in the Dark Souls games. Andre Norton's Ice Crown is an interesting sci-fi subversion where the space traveler decides to stay on the medieval age planet. And another way I can get through my issues with fantasy is if the fantasy is a romance. Suddenly, the story isn't about which inbred tosspot gets to wear the shiny hat, it's about two people trying to make it work in a cold and uncaring system. Sacrificial Princess and the Kingdom of Beasts certainly delivers on that front, while also having a bunch of cute furry animal people, if that's your thing. I ain't judging. The titular Sacrificial Princess is Salfi, and she is about to be fed to the great king of the Beast Kingdom. He is a great ruler, but also fearsome and terrifying. And Salfi knows absolutely no fear, so she just squishes his paws. If you're at all familiar with romance tropes, you'll hardly be surprised that the king finds this amusing and gives Salfi the run of the castle until the night of her sacrifice, much to the chagrin of his advisor Anubis. While accompanying the king on an observation trip of a tumultuous area, we get some backstory about how, even many years following the end of the Great War between beasts and humans, there is still tensions and people who would be willing to start up the fighting again. And the only way the king knows to stop these people is by terrifying them into obedience. The king has chosen the path of a strong and lonely ruler. On the night of the sacrifice, Salfi is dressed in her best wedding gown and is escorted down to the sacrificial chamber for the night. She gets jumped by an assassin targeting the king, but is then rescued by the king, who is morphed into his sexy Bishi form. Turns out the king is half human, and on these nights when the demonic miasma clears, his human form comes out. On the plus side, he hasn't actually eaten 98 previous sacrifices, and instead let them go while stabbing himself in the arm to leave pools of human blood around his cover. But Salfi doesn't want the king to hurt himself anymore, and instead insists that he eat her.
My king, come again. Don't make me repeat myself. I'm making Salfi my queen.
NANI?!
Told you they'd be mad.
I've personally read more than a few stories where a quirky, self-assured girl falls in love with a prince/king, and Sacrificial Princess moves through the standard story tropes really efficiently. By the end of the first chapter, the king has realized that Salfi is way too important for him to ever let go, and commits to marrying her over the objections of basically everyone. This sets up his primary advisor Anubis to be the on and off again antagonist going forward. And thus begins the royal court dance, where the king has decided to do an unpopular thing, so all his advisors team up to try and undermine his decision without directly challenging him or incurring his wrath. Anubis' first order of business is to bring in a bunch of daughters of influential families as potential queen or harem candidates. This is a common and powerful move in royal romances because there isn't a lot the king can do without undermining his power. The ladies are all daughters of powerful families that he cannot afford to make enemies of. 'Cause let us remember that a king's practical power is derived from the rich families that support him. Since part of the job description of a king is to get hitched and make a da babbies, he also can't dismiss the ladies out of hand. And last but not least, if, say, one of the princesses gets really mad and kills Salfi, well, that that certainly isn't Anubis's fault. He never intended for such a thing to happen. This scheme, of course, backfires in exactly the way you think it would. The cat princess gets really angry at Salfi and attacks her, but the king sees that and stops her, and now has more than enough reason to banish her from the kingdom forever. Also, Salfi ends up with a new ally. One of the princess prospects is this crocodile girl, Amit. She was sent by her family mostly as a long shot. She wasn't really interested in becoming queen, but the lizard races are considered less high-born than the mammals, and they figured they'll take their shot. Over the course of the chapter, she becomes friends with Salfi, and once the whole affair is over, she stays behind as Salfi's lady's maid. This adds to the number of people in the castle more loyal to Salfi than to Anubis, reducing the number of attack angles he has. I'd like to take a minute to gush about how adorable the artwork is for this series. It's not necessarily the most technically skilled. The artist seems a little unsure how to handle Leo's legs when sitting or in bed. But composition issues just pale in comparison to these cute designs. There's Salfi in the goat costume, her attendants Sai and Klops, Amit's endearingly toothy enthusiasm, this bat kid, and then later there's a sassy hyena boy doing the armpits pose, a love-flustered orca, and this armadillo. Each volume comes with a couple of bonus pages where the artist reverses the dynamics, so Salfi is the only monster, and you get to see all the main cast redrawn as hot anime lads, which is very... yes. The hyena boy is chosen to be Salfi's captain of the guard, which is part of the ongoing process of slotting her into the existing political structure. This is something royal romances can do. After the couple has emotionally committed to being together, there is still a lot of conflict that can be mined from the practical reality of them getting married. Interestingly, this story skipped to marriage before Salfi developed feelings for the king. King Leo is, of course, all in on their relationship once he realizes that Salfi makes him happy, and that's more valuable than gold when you're a ruler. But Salfi just kind of goes along with the whole queen thing at first. She's not really invested in it or has given it much thought. I somewhat demeaningly earlier said that she's a bit manic pixie, and while I do like her character, she definitely fits into the trope of a girl who is so compassionate and nice that she makes the people around her nicer. The power to make the world better through trust and compassion is a very common fantasy in media aimed at women. There is a reason why Salfi was so blasé about her own personal safety when she first met King Leo. From a young age, she learned that the people raising her were only doing so that they could use Salfi's sacrifice as a way of protecting the child they actually cared about. The blatant lack of love or caring in their eyes just absolutely terrified Salfi, and is part of the reason she wasn't even fazed by Leo's forced bluster. Salfi warms to the idea of becoming queen when she realizes she can take some of the leadership burden off of Leo and not just act as a counselor. And over the course of the tale, she is noticeably falling for Leo. Now, this is a lot more family-friendly than, say, Red River, where the two leads will have sex for 3 days because they missed each other. Salfi falling for Leo mostly involves booping his snoot and snuggling into his tail, which is pretty cute. Not that I was super excited to learn the ins and outs of cross-species matings, but their potential child does bring me back around to my issue with stories about monarchies. Now, this is a fairly positive story. I'm putting money on Salfi marrying the king and her empath powers not healing the rift between man and monsters, but setting society on that path. She's already had a trial run with her monster-hunting childhood friend. But so? Salfi and Leo both had very bad parents, and though I'd like to think they could overcome that setback, it doesn't change the fact that at some point in their line, being born into power and privilege is going to irrevocably skew the mindset of whichever little demon ends up sitting on the throne. Monarchies are a system where power and privilege are gifted by birthright, and that is just a fundamentally bad system. And even though royal romances bypass most of my issues with these types of stories, they absolutely do indulge in the fantasy that if a good person had total power, they could make the world better. This is a very powerful fantasy that many people have. Dictators have been elected because people think this. The reality is that the ultimate power of dictators and monarchs is really just the power of unfettered abuse within the existing power structure. Any attempts to reform or lessen the power of the lord class will be met with resistance. I'm sure Leo and Salfi will improve things within their kingdom, but there is a limit to how much you can improve from within the system like that. Our current system of distributed power and voting is far from perfect, not least of which because it keeps electing dictators, but at least it has systemic paths to power for outsiders, and sometimes you get an Ocasio. Meanwhile, I can't even promise myself that Salfi and Leo's first kid will be up to the task of running a kingdom, but it doesn't matter because they're getting the job anyway. Horribly designed systems of government aside, I had fun with Sacrificial Princess in the Kingdom of Beasts. It's adorable and funny, the king is a smooth fella, and I'm interested in how its setups are going to pay off. Highly recommended, even if it's a little hard to find on the shelf. May you go in peace, and remember to pledge fealty to Lord Algorithm by liking, sharing, and subscribing.